Thank you, friend. Today we are talking about selecting a right project lifecycle. As usual, before I go further, I want to know you, and it becomes difficult to know audience when you are talking to a computer. So what I use some polls which helps me to visualize all of you. So let's take a few polls. It's quick 2 questions which will help me to understand who you are, our audience. So first poll, which talks about your project roles. So which of the following represent your project role? Do you consider yourself project manager, business analyst, PMO, governance, quality, development? Where do you fit in? Okay, so we have 60% votes already received. I'm waiting for a few more. Good, great. So we are approaching 80. I'm about to close. So I'm sharing with you also, so you also understand who are attending with you. We have a majority of project managers attending, and then we have a project leaders, scrum masters, and business analysts. So if we combine these two, we cross approx 80% of our audience base. Great. And let me talk about certification. So because many of our participants are the one who are targeting some certification in near future. So are you targeting some certification exam in next, say, 1 month time or 2 months time or by December? If yes, which one is it? Great. So we do have people thinking about certifications, and majority of them are thinking about PMP, and rest of them, let's share the results. Okay, so we have good amount of percentage talking about PMP, and then we have another percentage which is talking about certified Scrum professionals. So I understand many of you might be interested in taking SCUs. Great. So yeah, so that is one of the possible reason of attending this program. So let's get back to our our presentation and look at things. So I understand good amount of project leaders, project managers are around us. So now back to the topic, selecting right project life cycle. Now we have, like, I have divided this particular talk in 4 segments. First, we will talk about what is this project and life cycle is all about. Before we talk about selecting a life cycle, we should know what this is. And then we will get into 3 project management life cycles, which are frequently discussed: adaptive, iterative, and predictive. So we will talk about these 3 life cycles. Then we will look a bit deeper into software development processes, because I understand many of you are coming from software development background. From a poll also, it's quite evident many of you are interested in Agile and Scrum. So we will talk about software development processes, and then we will conclude the talk. And this is how this 1-hour webinar is organized in. Now, project and project life cycle. So what is project? Now, many of you who are preparing for PMP, I see that we have a 57% people preparing for PMP. They understand the project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create unique product, service, or result. And this is how the PMBOK defines it. Now, this definition looks great. It talks about that we are doing something first time, unique. It will produce something which will be unique product or service which doesn't exist. But I like the second definition more, which is a bit simplified version, which talks about a temporary endeavor whose successful completion results in the delivery of the expected business value. Now, the first definition just talks about that we create something. The second definition focuses on we create something which provides business value, and for that business value only we usually run projects. And common thing is it's a temporary endeavor. So project we run for a duration, we collect people for a duration, we have some vision, we have some charter, we create some scope statement, and we achieve that scope and we move next. And that is how most of the project works. Now, after understanding the project, let's look at project life cycle. A life cycle as a term defines some series of phases which help one thing to start and end. We talk about human life cycle, we talk about product life cycle, which is like starting till ending it. Similarly, a project life cycle is something which combines series of phases that project passes through from its beginning to its closer. Now these phases, many times we visualize them as a serial process. We think that, okay, there will be a one phase. After finishing of a one phase, the another phase will start. First thing is, what is this phase? Phase signifies that we are concentrating on one type of activity during that particular duration. Say, if you are in a software development, so phase means that we are, if we are focusing on requirement related work for a month, we can say that this is a phase where we are focusing on requirement, and this phase will achieve some goal. So we may have some goal, like it will come up with a detailed requirement document. So this phase will end when we achieve that particular goal. So this is how these phases can be visualized at. Now the project will go through multiple such phases, and these phases are industry dependent. Means if you are running a software development project, you will have a one type of phases. If you are running a construction project, you will have another type of project phases, depending upon the type of work you do there. Now these phases may be overlapped, means you may have a phase which run in parallel, some part in parallel with the another phase. So you are still doing requirement related work, but you may start designing, you may start doing development. So you may start a second phase activity where the first phase is still going on. And in some cases, you may run two completely parallel phases. So project life cycle is defines that this is how various phases, various cycles a project will go through before it ends. And these cycles defines the type of work we would be concentrating on during that particular duration. So we spoke about project, and we spoke about that, okay, project grows through a series of cycles, and which defines project life cycle. Now, since projects are temporary and endeavor, and each project goes through these phases, why do we need different project life cycles? Why can't we just have one type of life cycles? Many times people think the project goes through 5 phases, which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and control, and closing. Now, in my PMP classes, I keep reminding my clients that this is process groups. This is not a phase. Phase will be industry specific. You can't have a one set of activities or one sequence of activities for all your business needs or for all type of projects, because one size does not fit for all. Let's take some example. So you are constructing a bridge. So here is a project which involves construction of a bridge, which goes through various phases and which is quite well-defined process. You have a good engineering data which tells you how to construct a bridge. Then you have another project where you are exploring that I want to create a new dish. So you are a restaurant and you want to launch a new menu or new product or a new say a burger or say vegetable, something. And you go through various experiments, you mix few things, you taste it, you try on some customers, and you go through various iteration before you declare that this is a recipe of our new dish. So it's again a project, but different than constructing a bridge. Then you may have a project like New Horizons, which runs for a decade. The project started in 2006. Till today, it has covered 3 billion miles, and it is near Pluto. And we are the NASA is thinking of extending it for another, say, 2017 to 2020, so it can go beyond Pluto. So it's a project requires different type of planning because you are launching something which will run for decade. It's new, different. Then you might be developing a software app for Facebook marketing. You are figuring out which story, which requirement, which functionality will attract the maximum visitors, and you are thinking of how you design this particular app so you can use Facebook effectively. Another project. Now you may wonder, okay, what I am talking about. These things are very, very different. it's very unlikely the same company running a NASA missions and also running a restaurant. Okay, these definitely, most of you might appreciate that these projects are definitely different and they require a different treatment. But most of you might be working in an environment where you do one type of work. Many of you might be working in a software development, and you may say that, okay, we guys do software development, it's offshore onshore model. We get order from onshore, we develop at offshore, and we ship it. So for us, okay, we appreciate that projects are different, but for us, most of them are same. So let's explore further. Even if you are working on a one type of projects, but they will have some different characteristics. Running a project which will run for 1 month and running a project which will last for 2 years may require different treatment. Running a maintenance project and running a new product development may require different treatment. Running running a project in a complex and uncertain environment, uncertainty might be coming because of the technology in use or because of the volatile requirement, would be different than running a certain defined project where you have to convert, say, manual process into a software. So even if you are working in a one industry, primarily these examples are coming from software industry, you still may need different flavor in your project life cycle. May not be that drastically different, but you may need to have some flavors which provides you a tools to effectively manage a given project life cycle. So before I go further, I want to understand, or I want to know, like, do you guys have some classification of project in your quality management system or in your organization process assets? Many times, as a project manager, many of you are working as a project manager, you end up selecting a project lifecycle. So do you have some project characteristics template defined in your organization which helps you to select a right project lifecycle? So I am running this poll and it will help us in knowing that do we have a system where we select a project lifecycle. Okay, 70% voted. Great. Few more. And see, webinar, many times it becomes one directional, but these polls helps you to look around. They are kind of live surveys. So even if you are listening to me, but you do get a lot of ideas from your peers. And this question may make you think that, okay, what is happening in the industry? Because whoever is attending is definitely working in a project environment, and you know them already. Great. So I'm closing the poll, and we can see that 66% of the participants are having some sort of project lifecycle selection criteria. Great. Follow-up questions for the 66% people who have selected yes. Like, what all attributes do you use when you think about project lifecycle or when you think about selecting a project lifecycle? Like, which all factors plays a roles in identifying a right project lifecycle? You can select multiple options. It's not a one option selection tool. You can pick up many. And this should be a very informative for all of us, even for me as well, where I know that, okay, how this software lifecycle selection is done in many organizations. Great. So we have received a good number of polls. Final call, if you want to pick up a few things, please do that. Okay, so we have good thing, and look at the results. Most of these factors plays a role when organization selects the life cycle. Complexity seems to be the dominator, but other factors are also equally playing the roles. Great. So it means whatever I was talking makes sense. We do have a project life cycle selection and process where we look at risk, business values, project size. Size could be in terms of effort, it could be in terms of duration. We look at complexity and we look at technology in use before we select the project life cycle. So let's talk about 3 life cycles which are discussed in PMBOK. And PMBOK talks about these life cycles and try to cover all type of projects. Predictive life cycles, iterative life cycle, and adaptive life cycle. If you do PMP exam, you need to have a good grip on these 3 life cycles. Though I personally believe that majority of PMBOK is written assuming that by default predictive life cycle is followed with some level of iterative nature. Now these life cycle, when they come in practice, may not work in their pure form. You end up mixing them. So let's look at them before we talk more. A predictive life cycle. So many times you see a graph in PMBOK which talks about all 5 process groups and activities done in those 5 process groups throughout the project life cycle. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm not talking about initiating and closing. And I have divided planning into 2, scope and planning. So there's a 2 type of activity I am dividing into. Now, in predictive life cycle, the focus is identifying scope in the initial stages of the project. It's a type of project where we baseline scope early. In this life cycle, we also baseline our project management plan quite early in project. Say if I'm running a 12-month project, maybe after 2nd month or 3rd month, I should have baseline scope and baseline plan. And after that, for remaining 8 months, 9 months, I just need to execute what has been planned and identified in the initial stage. I may do some level of tweaking in a planning because things will not go as planned earlier, but that tweakings are bit minor in nature. Similarly, I may do some scope assessment, but they need to be controlled well, and the effort which goes into plan and scope after 3 months is going to be very less. So this particular graph talks about project life cycle. So y-axis is talking about start and end, and in effort is like amount of hours we are spending on these particular activities. So in a predictive life cycle, scope and planning are an intensive type of activity in the initial stage of the project. As we move forward, we start focusing more and more on executing. So if you have such kind of structure, it means you are defining scope early, you are defining cost and time baselinings early, and usually you fix up the cost quite early in project. Means many times when people talk about fixed price, fixed scope kind of projects, they are usually good if you follow a predictive life cycle. Now, predictive life cycle can be only followed when you have a real control or when you have a real knowledge of baselining or identifying the scope, time, and estimation quite early in the project. Now, what type of project can work in that environment? Where things are repetitive in nature. You are expert. You have been building bridges. You have been building structures. You have built 3 buildings in last 1 year, and this is the 4th building you are doing. And more or less, the process is quite predictable. So a work which is quite repetitive in nature. You have a good engineering data. You have a good industry data available to think about that particular project and requirement, and you can predict that this is how it will go. The technologies are also well known. This is not the first time you are building something, you have been doing it. In such kind of environment, you provide stringent change control. So if I take an example, if you are buying a flat in a group housing or in a builder society or something where they build the flats and they give it to you, you pay a fixed amount of money for your flat and everything get baseline. Your cost is predictable, your layout is predictable. You don't have an option where after 6 months a builder may say that rather than making 2 rooms, he's making 3 rooms or 1 room. So a scope is fairly defined in the beginning when you are making the purchase, and at the same time the price is also defined when you are making the purchase. So such kind of things requires good amount of change management. So there should be a stringent process to control the changes in a predictive life cycle. The monitoring approach for a predictive life cycle is more towards plan versus target. Why? Because in predictive life cycle, we believes in that we can plan well in advance. We understand what is needed, and since we understand what is needed, we want to control the variances. The more we control the variances, the better the product, better the output would be. Now let's talk about iterative life cycle. Now the problem with the predictive life cycle is you can't put it when you don't know what you want to build. So I'm not saying the predictive life cycle is wrong. The problem is that we can't predict many project environments because we can only know about the project requirement when we explore that. Assume that you are building something new and you can only visualize one part of it. You think that let's make it, because putting time and visualizing the complete thing may mislead you, because the customer, the stakeholder which are giving you a requirement, they don't know what they need. So you may create something on the basis of your first level of understanding. You may face the scope and say that this is something I will build, and you plan that scope, you identify that scope, and you execute it, and then you show it to set of customers, take feedback on it, and according to feedback, you plan the next iteration. So it's like the complete project which you are doing in 12 months, you may divide in quarters, maybe 3 months or 2 months iterations, or even a 1 month iteration, and you do a sequence of scoping, planning, and executing in that duration. So it's like running things in cycles where we run something working, we run something which can provide us a feedback, and then we refine it as per the customer feedbacks. So this is an iterative life cycle. So if I talk about this particular graph, I'm showing that I'm doing scoping initially, I'm doing planning initially, and then I'm doing executing. This is my first cycle finishing. While I am still executing, I may start planning about the next sprint, or say next iteration rather than using a word. So we start planning about the next iteration. Planning, scoping of next iteration may run in bit parallel with executing of the current iteration. And similarly, I may baseline the scope for the next iteration, run it, and I keep doing this. And it helps me to collect feedback from customers based on my understanding which I had when I started the iteration. So this type of work is an iterative life cycle. So scope is defined in every iteration. So you may baseline the scope for every iteration. The cost and time, you may have a top level cost and time estimates, but it gets refined every iterations. Such kind of projects may not work with fixed price, fixed scope kind of environment, because you need flexibility for your scope. Since you are not decomposing, baselining the complete scope, it may goes through changes, and you need a contract between customers and the providers which are a bit flexible in nature. You may baseline for one iteration, but when you talk about next iteration, you may need some adjustment. It requires for solving complex problems where we can't predict things. Usually when we work with new technology, it makes more sense to take such kind of iterative life cycles. The monitoring approach is more about are we able to solve the problem or right problem, rather than focusing on what we have planned versus target. The monitoring approach in iterative life cycle is, are we moving in the right direction? Is it more towards value oriented, that we wanted to do something and we thought of starting with one iteration? Are we moving in a right iteration? So for example, I wanted to create a website for job seekers, and since I have lots of requirement I can think of, it should have a social media plugin, it should have a phone app, integration with LinkedIn, people should be able to import their profile from LinkedIn, so many things. But I'm not sure which one will work. I'm not sure can I really develop all of them. So what I did is I run a first iteration where I spoke about that let's have a basic rudimentary website where I can collect a profile using textual input, and I can facilitate some level of job search so people can find the required job. And I run this particular iteration as a first learning cycle. I looked at it, I collected feedback on this particular product, and then refined and identified the scope for the next cycle or next iteration, and I keep working on this. It is suitable when problems and solutions are not too well defined. When we are not certain, we are not making bridge this time. We are kind of making softwares, or we are making something which is not having that standardized process of building or that kind of standardized industrial data. So that's an iterative life cycle. Now comes an adaptive life cycles, and I understand many of our clients are quite confused between difference between iterative and adaptive. And I confuse you further. Adaptive life cycle is also an iterative life cycle. So adaptive life cycle is an iterative and incremental way of developing things. But why we use adaptive? Because it iterates very frequently. It iterates more frequently than the iterative life cycles. If you look at these particular graphs, now you're familiar with the scope, plan, and executing thing. One specific thing I want to point out here is the scoping is a ongoing work. In iterative, in predictive life cycles, we were doing scoping at cycles and we were adjusting them. In case of adaptive life cycle, you may invest a bit more time in an initial stage of the project on scoping, but you keep investing time on scope related, requirement related work throughout the project. What does it mean? It means we are working in a highly change driven environment. We keep talking about requirement from the day we start the project till we end it. We may have more conversation on requirement whenever we move from one iteration to another iteration. In adaptive lifecycle also we run iterations, but the iteration durations are in weeks rather than running monthly or quarterly iterations. We run say 2 weeks, 3 weeks kind of iterations. And on iteration boundaries, we may have a bit more intensified scope related efforts, but in general, we keep talking about scopes every day. So it's a continuous effort which we put on scope. Execution is happening in a very quick cycles, and at the end of every cycle, we plan for the next cycle. So planning is happening throughout. That's another difference, but you may see a spike in planning whenever we reach an iteration of boundaries. So it's like a continuously change driven environment where you don't even baseline things for a quarter, where you have a running requirement list, and this running requirement list keep getting refined. New things keeps getting every day, and somebody keeps working on them, somebody keeps refining them and keeps them ready for the teams. So whenever they finish their 2-week cycle, they pick up again the new set of requirements. So this is an adaptive life cycle. So the characteristics and utility will more or less match with iterative life cycles. Here, scope is defined throughout the project. I spoke about costing. Now, many times we get worried about how budgets are maintained in such kind of adaptive and iterative way. In most of the cases, budget, time are constrained. Like you have 6 months to build something like this, and let's try to make this possible in 6 months. So 6 months may work as a time box, and we figure it out, how do we generate value in that 6 months? And it requires a flexible contract types which facilitates these changes, because you can't just fix the scope and expect people to, you can't fix the price or fix the effort and expect people to keep appreciating changes every week and still deliver the complete scope at the end of project. So contract types requires more collaboration between customer and the development group, and they are suitable for complex problems, so problems which requires frequent learning cycle. The monitoring approach in adaptive life cycle should be very different than adaptive life cycle, than predictive life cycle. In a predictive life cycle, we primarily focus on, did we achieved, what is the variance between the scheduled activity and actual activity? That's the variance baseline kind of reports which we look at when we do predictive lifecycle. In case of adaptive lifecycle and iterative lifecycle, it's all about value orientation. Did we get the required business need met by doing these features? So if I look at the same website example, if I go further, the website is trying to figure out that can we develop something on a social media platform which will bring more visitors to a job site. So it's primarily a social media project where I'm not sure will Twitter work, will LinkedIn work, will Facebook work, but my goal is that I want to increase my website traffic through social media by 20%. So the adaptive lifecycle monitoring will be more towards are we able to increase our website traffic by 20% by doing these things, rather than focusing on we have a written requirement about say Facebook integration. Is it done? It is expected to be done by end of 15th August. If it is not done, you are doing bad. So that kind of monitoring is not suitable for adaptive life cycle type of projects. Now, final poll. It is like many of you who are preparing for PMP understand that we have something called rolling wave planning. And rolling wave planning is a concept which talks about that rather than planning everything up front, we can do planning progressively. Means we may plan a part of the project, and as we go further, we will plan more. So the question is, if you are running a predictive life cycle, a kind of where you know the scope, where you know everything, can you still use rolling wave planning? Or it is expected that in such kind of environment, everything should be fixed in advance. And I will also extend this conversation to other life cycles also, because rolling wave planning is a concept, and we will explore that how it works in various life cycle models. Great, so we do have votes. Okay, so some of you still have to choose your option. Great, so it's moving good. And yes, so we are about to reach a desired threshold where I can close the poll and share with you. I would say that this is very close. So 59% believes yes, it can be done, and 41% believes it can't be. So let's talk about what is this rolling wave planning and how it works. See, the concept of rolling wave planning is that rather than planning everything up front, we can, it's impractical in many cases, even if you are running a predictive lifecycle project, telling that it's a one-year project, and if the year is ending on December, telling me as a resource that on December 5, you have to work on this particular activity. So rolling wave planning can be applied even in predictive lifecycle, and that is the mistake which I find many times. People do know about requirements, but they also end up planning complete project in the beginning. Even though the effort which I shown, it was showing in that way, but it is not necessary. Now in predictive life cycles also, you may have a fixed scope which is identified in the beginning of the project, but there is a possibility that under that fixed boundary only, you plan the works progressively. It's not necessary that you may keep few things at a summary level. You talk about hammock activities, you talk about whatever. So it's a gross level, summary level activities which you may create for the future work, but you have estimated them in advance. So it's like that you are progressively detailing out your project plan or a project schedule with passes of time, and which you can do even in predictive life cycle. The same thing you can do for a scope also. In predictive life cycle, we do expect teams making scope baselining initially, but baselining doesn't mean that you have a very elaborated requirement or details of each work package. You can progressively elaborate the work packages as you move forward, even in predictive life cycle. But predictive life cycle does mean that you remain in the same work breakdown structure. Now let's talk about iterative and predictive, adaptive. Now you may think that if we can do this in predictive lifecycle, then what is the difference? It becomes iterative or adaptive. The difference is in predictive lifecycle, we do think about scope and project boundaries very clearly in the beginning of the project. Even if we are elaborating them later, but the boundaries are very well defined, scope is very well defined. In case of iterative lifecycle, the scope is defined per iteration. Means in the beginning of an iteration, you have a clarity of this is something which we have to do in this particular iteration. You elaborate it, you do it in that particular iteration. In this, when you start a second iteration, you may have some scope elements which were not thought before, depending upon the learning which you do from the first iteration. So you add maybe new work package item or a WBS level or a tree level items at the end of iterations. And you further elaborate them, plan them. So that is how the iterative progressive elaboration will work. In case of adaptive, you may keep getting new items, new features every day. And it is dynamically getting shuffled, prioritized by person or a group of individuals where they are looking at how can we bring more visitor through social media to our website. And this is something you are not baselining, and it is running, it is live. So scope is always, the conversation towards scope is always live. And that is why the adaptive life cycle comes into the picture. And many of you may say that, okay, we understand all this, then how the project will finish? If you keep talking about, okay, keep giving me the requirement, then when the project will finish? The project will finish when it makes no sense to work on those requirements, no commercial sense to work on those requirements. So if you get your business value, if you got that 20% new visitor through social media, and even if you work more, you know that it is not getting more visitor count, even if I add more social media integration, because we have reached a point of diminishing returns, close the project. So the adaptive lifecycle, the dynamic scope changing project is primarily focusing on, we close the project when we get the desired value, rather than we close the project when we develop the desired scope. So that's the difference which I want to put. So let's talk about software development process, because many of you are coming from software background. So I wanted to talk about software development processes, because good amount of conversations are happening through Agile. Agile is more near to an adaptive life cycles. And let's talk about when to use Agile and when to use waterfall kind of things. So this is a diagram, a STACI graph, which talks about 2 dimension primarily, or 3 dimension. It talks about requirement as a 1 dimension, technology as another dimension, and people as a 3rd dimension. So this graphs means technology close to certain, far to certainty. So it's like as you move far, you are getting into very uncertain environment. Similarly, requirement close to agreement means everybody in a stakeholder group understand what they need. Towards far from agreement, where we are moving towards a direction where we don't have an agreement among the stakeholders what they want to build. So these are the 2 dimensions. The 3rd dimension, people, talks about a set of people who have been already working, so 3 people already working in a small team, and they keep delivering things. And moving towards a situation where new people are getting together, they have never worked before, and they are not 3, 4, they may be 10, 20, 25, and they are more, and that's another dimension which this particular diagram is putting into. So here we talk about that till the time things are very simple, means the requirements are agreement and technology is close to certain, a simple process, or we can say predictive process, may work. As things becomes more complicated or more complex, so where requirements are not certain or not in agreement, and technology is also not that comfortable, you have to explore new tools, new things, you move towards complex systems. Complex systems has to be managed differently than simple system. They need to follow adaptive life cycle, because you need to iterate. You need to learn about things, because you don't know what exactly stakeholders are asking for. So software development projects are at least complex, and sometimes they even chaotic. Chaotic is where you really have very dynamic situation where the need and the technology both are very uncertain. So now you may think that great, so at least we can say most of the software development projects are complex and we can by default apply an adaptive life cycle. And one of the framework which I end up talking about that, okay, we can use Scrum everywhere. Now, even if I go back on this particular diagram, you are in a complex environment, but complexity also varies. You may be at the beginning of complex environment and you may be an extreme end of a complex environment. Let's take some example. When you are developing a software which will help organizations to manage their sales lead well, you do have some level of requirement understanding because stakeholders understand what they need. They just want to, primarily their goal is that we should have a better way of tracking, managing the leads which we get in our projects. And technology, you may be developing a web-based product. All technologies are not clear because it requires some plugins from some external chat and other areas, but you have a fairly decent idea about the technology in use. Now, one type of project. The another type of project, your company has started off that we need to have some phone app. We are very new to phone-based work, and we are thinking of launching something where people can create a network and they can do say group job hunting. They can use referrals. Yeah, we are thinking what it should do, but the idea is let's make a crowd searching, a group and group searching job together. So that's an idea people are in agreement with, but more than that, we need to still figure it out. And both may fit into a complex environment, but may require a different process. Now, many times we end up implementing Scrum, and there is nothing wrong in it because Scrum is a framework which gives you a flexibility to design a detailed method for handling these two projects differently. And it has various tools like it allows you to identify your iteration length. Where your things are stable, you may go for a 1 month long iteration. Where things are very dynamic, you may go for weekly or 2 weeks long iteration. It allows you to do left on you how to do a plan related to a commercial release. If things are pretty stable, you may plan for a release for 3 months. If things are very dynamic, you may not do even release planning. You run every iteration. It also allows you to figure out how much detailed information should be added before work gets started on a given requirement. So there are tools like definition of ready and definition of done. If you use these things differently in these two projects, you may still use Scrum, but the life cycle or the process might vary a lot. So most of the software development projects may fall in the complex environment. There could be a few which may work perfect with waterfall or with simple processes. These projects could be, we are 3 people team. We have been working on softwares, one type of technology. We work on PLSQL and we are taking care of the same client. We add more reports and our project duration usually varies from 1 month to 2 months. So if you are running a short duration projects, pretty stable technology, you all have been working together for a while, you understand what you are working on, you may just run in a simple process. You collect the requirement, you do things, and you deploy it at the end of a month or at the end of 2 months. So there could be scenarios where simple processes works, where things are pretty straightforward. The same chart we can look at. But for rest of them, yes, Scrum does make good sense. So finally, time to conclude. So selection of a project lifecycle depend upon various project characteristics like, say, type of project you are working on, the uncertainty it involves. But you can summarize these characteristics in 2 dimensions, which talks about the scope uncertainty and the how uncertain your tool uncertainty, how uncertain your technology is and how uncertain stakeholders are on requirement. Use predictive life cycles when problems are well known, when the tools are well known, when the teams are well known. When we understand everything well, let's get into a predictive life cycle. If things are not that much clear, let's get into iterative. If things are very dynamic, let's move towards adaptive life cycles. And software projects are usually complex, but yes, as I said, the complex rigor may vary, and you may use even the same framework differently for the different type of projects. And devise some tool, some process which helps you to identify the right life cycle. And these are our details. So if you have any query related to any project management certification or concept, to visit our forum. We have a very active forum, forum.eisenbridge.com. And we do have a YouTube channel. We will be uploading this particular section, this particular video also on our YouTube channel soon. It may take 2-3 days. And all PDUs, SUs related things, please come to our forum and post there. In general, the basic information, this program, this webinar is approved for category A PDU. You will get an activity code in next 24 hours. It's an automatic email which comes from GoToWebinar. In case you don't get it, please visit our forum and raise a query. We will share it. That's about PDU. And for SEUs, since we spoke about generic things, talking about adaptive life cycle, you can also claim an SEU under category F, live learning. And if you're not clear how to claim about category F, go to our forum. We have a good amount of discussion where we talk about how to claim category F SEUs. If still it is not clear, please post it there. Try to use forum rather than using emails for SEUs and PDUs related queries. And it's time to take some questions. I understand we still have 10 minutes. So I think it's a good enough time to talk about some queries. So let's start from reverse. Okay. So the question came is, can I say iterative life cycle is a series of predictive life cycle? Yes, you can fairly say, rather than predicting things for the complete project, you predict things for a smaller duration. You explore things according to that prediction. You take feedback in account, and that's how you iterate. So if you have 4-5 phases, then it goes through, in each iteration, you goes through all those phases and you achieve your desired project outcome. Yes, you can do that. Okay, so we have an interesting question which talks about that why project will be defined in terms of success. Now, there have been talks, initial theories of project management were more focusing on iron triangles, triple constraints, where you have to manage scope, time, cost. And as a project team, we usually work as a person who don't understand business. We work like we are focused on what you tell us. You give us a requirement, meet us after 1 year or after project duration, and take us whatever you have asked for. Now, but companies who are usually running these projects are not actually looking at what they have asked for. They want to solve their business problem by using this particular project. And in today's environment, most of the organizations are moving towards benefit realization. Okay, are we realizing a value and benefit for which this project has started? And if you are going through PMP exams and all, the new PMP changes, which is becoming effective from January 2016, are primarily adding those tasks where they expect project manager to be more and more involved in ensuring that project meets the desired value. So even if in a productive life cycle, it doesn't make sense to finish a project and declare it was a successful because it was on time, on budget, and we delivered everything, but nobody wants to use it because whatever we delivered was outdated and we didn't listen to the customer from the beginning till we delivered something. So yes, we have to move towards project success. It doesn't make sense for the business to get the project in hand without making money out of it or without achieving business value for it. Now, so question came is that is iterative life cycle is good for Scrum project? So Scrum itself is an iterative life cycle. So Scrum is a framework, so they define it as a framework. Why? Because it doesn't give you a very defined steps. It gives you a freedom to identify various things like life cycles and other say definition of done and definition of ready, etc. And it's an iterative life cycle. It does iterate, but it iterates too frequently. So it doesn't even freeze the things for 1 month or 2 months. You can have a weekly by 2 weekly work of iterations, and scope is continuously emerging. So yes, it's an iterative, but it's more than iterative. It's adaptive. So it's frequently iterating than iterating on a defined cycle. Yes, Sanjay, so you are right. So burger example, if you look at my things, you will find a lot of burger example. Okay, so I think we have been talking about different type of life cycles. So okay, so I should go reverse because many of these things have been handled. So what's the first stage project we should finalize the life cycle? And it's a great question. And many times project fails because of identification of wrong life cycles. And good amount of software project fails because we assumed we know what we are we assume we know what we are solving. We assume the customer is able to tell what he needs. And if you work with an assumption that customer knows the requirement, and after developing a product you identify that that was a wrong, it will be a big mess. So project lifecycle selection is the first thing which you do in your project. If you look in a PMP language, when you start your develop project management plan, this is the first thing you identify project lifecycle. And depending upon the project lifecycle, your complete project planning or remaining part of your project management plan will vary. Because making a time management plan and making a schedule in iterative lifecycle will be very different than predictive lifecycle. So answer is the project lifecycle has to be identified in the beginning of the project. And another question, which is again coming a great one. So it is talking about my question is, if I start with an iterative or adaptive life cycles, but later I realize that scope doesn't need any further changes or improvement, can I move to a predictive life cycle now for the remaining project? The answer is yes. Now, rather than looking at a project, look it as a product. So what I will say that you may have started a product. You may thought of that I want to create this particular app. You started with the product. Initially, you are not having any idea. You were just at an ideation stage. You were exploring, and you have a product launch. Till that product went into launch, you were following adaptive life cycle. Once it got launched, you started following iterative. It is not that frequently changing. And once it goes into maintenance and support, it is predictive. You know what it has to be, what should be done for that particular project, and things are becoming pretty stable. So in one particular product goes through various stages of product life cycle, and depending upon the stage of product life cycle, you need to select a project life cycle, because at different stages has a different characteristics. So in a given project, you may need to select so in a given product, you may end up having multiple different projects with a different life cycle. Okay, a few more. Another question which is coming: can customer impose the choice of life cycle on a performing organization? Why not? Because they understand it well. So they can recommend, say they don't want to. If I'm a customer and you come up to me and say that, okay, this is your requirement, I will give you a work. After 1 year, I am following predictive life cycle, but I am not sure what I want. I says, please don't keep me in dark for 1 year. I want something running every month. And it's good if you follow adaptive life cycle or iterative life cycle, where I can see where you are heading towards. You may say, no, I will give you a report. I will give you a project monitoring report, actual versus target and all. He says that I am not sure whatever we are planning, how good it is. If you track something against which I am not already comfortable with, what value I am getting? You have shown me a good project plan. It looks good. but I am not finding confident. I am not confident enough to trust your plan. So rather than showing me a variance report on against a plan which I don't trust, better you show me the real thing and follow adaptive life cycle. So definitely customer is your key stakeholder, and he can suggest you a life cycle which is good for you. So I think there was a questions about predictive life cycle versus iterative life cycles and what is the advantage and etc. etc. So now my talk may look like a predictive life cycle is a waste. We should never use it. But look at the different angle. Predictive life cycle is very cost effective if you can really predict. If you really know what you are working on, if you really know your tools and techniques, you really know your team, why you have to give a demo and ask feedback in between? Better finish the complete work and show it because you are confident it will work. So in those cases, the predictive life cycle will work, and it is cheaper to run a project in a predictive life cycle in those cases because it makes good sense. You are not iterating. Iterative development is a planned rework development. So don't plan a rework when you can live without it. But the counterpoint is don't remain in a myth of that you will not have a rework till the end of the project. Because if you remain in a myth, you may end up doing more rework when you have a complete project ready. So just balance, it will work. Great friends, I know I could not answer many of your questions, but I hope this webinar, you must have found some value out of it. And do post your queries, maybe in a thread once the video is live, or you can even tweet about it. I will try to look at maximum number of queries. Our forum is a continuous interaction point where we keep interacting 24/7, and many of you are already an active user of our forum.isenbridge. So please visit us and post your queries there. And for SEUs and PDUs, please wait for automated mail. And if things are not clear, again, forum is the best place to visit. You get category A PDU and you get category F SEU for attending this session. Thanks again for joining our session on selecting a project lifecycle for your projects. Thank you.